Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, commissioners. Good morning to the evidence leaders. Welcome to day 6, the second last day of the inquiry. To my right, I am joined by Commissioner Nomahlubi Kwinana. To my left, I am joined by Commissioner Pili Lintuli. We have our evidence leaders. We will promptly start with the first stakeholder, Universal Basic Income Coalition. Is that tomorrow's program? Okay, they are. Okay, I see Lino saying that they are here today actually, so there's a minor change to the program. So can I ask the representatives from Universal Basic Income Coalition to come forward? If they're joining us in person or if they join, oh, I see they're joining us in person. Kenneth, can we organize some some water bottles? I see there's just a few scattered around. Thank you so much. Just for brief introductions, your names as well as the role that you play at the organization.
Good morning. I'm Vincent Skosana, the Regional Manager for Gauteng Office from the Black Sash.
Good morning, Sianda Baduza. I'm a researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice.
Good morning, my name is Khotatso Sibanda and I am the Black Sash National Helpline Manager. We are here on behalf of the Universal Basic Income Coalition, which is a coalition consisting of a number of organizations that we'll get into a bit later.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Reverend Mbenege. I'm from GRAPE. I'm representing the religious perspective when it comes to UBIC. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Will all of you be making or answering making presentations or answering questions when evidence leaders are asking questions?
I'll be making the presentation, but I think all 4 of us are available to answer any questions.
Okay, so I'll have to swear all 4 of you in. We'll start right at the beginning of the table. Can you just kindly stand up, ma'am? Your full names for the record.
Khotatso Sibanda.
Will you be taking the prescribed oath or affirmation?
I agree.
Which one will you be taking, the oath or the affirmation?
I'll be answering questions, so which one should I take? Please give me guidance.
It's about preference, so most people or people generally prefer the oath. Or
Let's do the oath.
do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience? Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present before the commission is the truth, nothing but the whole truth? If so, raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
Sianda Baduza.
Will you be taking the prescribed oath or affirmation?
I'll take the oath.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present before the commission is the truth, nothing but the whole truth? If so, raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you.
Vincent Kosana.
So will you be taking the prescribed oath or affirmation?
I'll take the oath.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present before the commission is the truth, nothing but the whole truth? If so, raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you.
Bonga njalo siyabulela Mbenenge.
Will you be taking the prescribed oath or affirmation?
The oath, please.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present before the commission is the truth, nothing but the whole truth? If so, raise your right hand and say, so help me God.
So help me God.
Duly sworn in, colleagues, be reminded that you have 20 minutes. Just looking at the time. So you have until 10 past 9.
Thank you very much to the Commission for giving us an opportunity to present. So before I start, I just wanted to briefly talk about who the Universal Basic Income Coalition is. So UBIC, or Universal Basic Income, which we abbreviate to UBIC, is a formation of South African civil society, research, human rights organizations, which collectively advocate for the realization of a universal social protection floor in South Africa by way of extending basic income support to all able-bodied adults aged between 18 and 59. So we were established formally in March of 2023 with the adoption of a position paper, logo, terms of reference, but the grouping that Basic Income Coalition is based out of has been active since 2002 during the time of the Taylor Commission, which was an investigation into comprehensive social security and which of course recommended basic income way back 20 years ago as a solution to the acute crisis of hunger, poverty and inequality in South Africa. So we're a member-driven organization or coalition, which means we're not a standalone organization or a legal entity. Instead, we're different organizations that come together to advocate for basic income. So these are all of the different organizations that are part of UBIC, and I'm sure you would have heard in our introductions as well that we all work at different organizations. We have different expertise. So I'm an economist and a researcher. Kgotatso is a lawyer, human rights advocate at the Black Sash, Vincent too. Reverend is, of course, a reverend and religious leader. So we come together, bring together our expertise in this advocacy. So why would we then make a submission when we advocate for basic income at a commission on food systems? Well, because mainly we believe that there is a very strong link in South Africa between income poverty and hunger and food insecurity. And so this is notwithstanding any issues in the food system, but we think that any serious solution to tackle the issues in food systems and people's access to food has to also consider the effect that income poverty plays in driving a lot of insecurity. So one of the most widely accepted facts about South Africa is that the country is generally food secure at the national level, as experts would refer to. And this means that the country produces enough food to feed everyone. And so this points to hunger and food insecurity being mainly, not entirely, but mainly issues around distribution and access and not necessarily scarcity. And what we know is that the majority of people in South Africa depend on income in order to access food. So have a statistic over there that landlessness is central to this. So when you compare how many households in South Africa derive livelihoods from agriculture, you see that the proportion is much lower than the rest of the continent and a lot of other middle income and developing countries. So only 17.1% of South African households engage in agriculture, whereas around 90% in the rest of the continent do. So what this points to is South Africa's food insecurity being more tightly linked to income poverty than you would find in comparable regional economies. And I have some statistics over there just to drive the point further of this link between income poverty and hunger. So one is from the latest poverty trends report in South Africa that came out at the start of this year. 66.7% of South Africans live below the upper bound food poverty line, which means that around 40 million people are unable to afford their basic necessities every month. Of those, 10.8 million live under the food poverty line, which is the amount of money needed in order to meet the most basic caloric requirements. We also have another statistic there from a report that came out from the HSRC last year, which found that around 64.7% of households spend less money on food than the food poverty line per person. And we think that that's very closely correlated. If you look at the same report, it finds that 63.5% of households lack the sufficient access to nutrition and food. So those numbers are very closely correlated. Yes, there may be households who don't spend enough on food but are able to evade hunger and food insecurity, mainly through living off of the products of their land, but that's the minority. A lot of households depend on income, and the issue that we have is that a lot of households simply don't have enough income to be able to access food. Multiple studies also confirm this. We can also point to the unemployment rate for more evidence of this. So we know we're in a crisis of unemployment. Around 42% is the current broad unemployment rate. And 19% of households with no employed member experience hunger versus only about 7.6% of those with an employed member. And I have a quote there from one of the studies that look at drivers of hunger and food insecurity in South Africa, and you'll see that that also names quite specifically the fact that lack of access to food is usually directly related to income. And so what we think is that policy interventions to address food insecurity need to consider urgently the issue of income poverty for an adequate response. So I want to talk now briefly about gaps in South Africa's social assistance framework. And the reason for this is that having established that income poverty is mainly the driver of food insecurity, the social assistance framework or social grants are a way to, of course, address the issue of food insecurity. And in South Africa, social assistance is directly linked to hunger. Those rights are inseparable. They appear in the same line, for example, in Section 27. And we also know that social grants already reach very large group of people in the country. So 50% of households in our country have social grant as at least one source of income. And a further 25% or a quarter of all households in South Africa have social grants as either the main or the only type of income source that is available to them. And historically, social grants have been quite effective at alleviating food insecurity. So research has shown many positive impacts on things like dietary diversity, which is of course how the basket of goods of food that a household consumes is diverse and nutritious enough. BMI, which would be linked of course to improvements in nutrition for people who are chronically undernourished. Child nutrition, and I have there just some of the findings from various papers to pull out. So one study found that the old age pension increases food security in recipient household by 5 to 8%. One of the organizations that are part of UBIC, the Children's Institute, a research organization based at UCT, finds that the child support grant closes the nutrition gap between nutritionally disadvantaged children and wealthier children. And also I just wanted to pull out that specific statistic because the South African Human Rights Commission in 2023, as part of the recommendations after an investigation into malnutrition in the Eastern Cape, also recognized the important role that income plays in food security. And the quote there is that they directed DSD to collaborate with National Treasury to explore the feasibility of increasing the child support grant above the food poverty line as a way to address the nutrition needs of children. So it's pretty well established that grants are quite accepted as an effective form of targeting food insecurity. Lastly, we also have plenty of evidence to show that grants are mainly spent on food. So a rapid assessment conducted by DSD in 2021 after COVID found that 93.3% of all social relief of distress beneficiaries, the COVID-19 grant, were using their grant mainly for food purchases. However, what we've seen recently is as the grant coverage has increased, although it's been slowing down in recent years, and I'll point to this later in my presentation, the positive impacts of nutrition have leveled off. So if you look at the vulnerability of social grant households to hunger, you see that that's actually increased from 2019. It went up from 20.2% in 2019 to 26.6% in 2023. And we argue that this isn't a random effect. Instead, it is linked to the falling adequacy and the real value of grants. So how important grants are relative to food costs. So the first area to point to in terms of adequacy is just to look at the two biggest grants in our country in terms of coverage. So the child support grant, which currently reaches around 13 million children a month, the SRD grant, which reaches around 8 million, 7 to 8 million unemployed adults. So the child support grant, the story of the child support grant is that it's years of inadequacy that have not been rectified, and the impacts of it are starting to show now. On the graph on the left, which I hope is clear enough, but it shows that the child support grant was initially linked very closely to the cost of feeding and clothing a child. And as a result, when the food poverty line was first calculated in 2006, you saw that the value of the food poverty line and the child support grant were very closely linked. But what happens, of course, on an annual basis is that that food poverty line is essentially adjusted for inflation every year. But the child support grant, because of subsequent years or consecutive years of under-investment, so like below inflation increases, has essentially been set on a path where the gap between the food poverty line, which is a measure of adequacy, and the value of the grant are constantly increasing. And of course, just to point out that the food poverty line doesn't even necessarily measure nutrition or whether the basket of food available to households or children is nutritious, because it's just based on the average basket that poor households spend, so the food consumption basket. So there's the PMB EJD, Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group. They have an index every month that tracks the cost of an actual nutritious basket for children. And you see a similar pattern there on the graph on the right, where we've been tracking it from 2018 when they started producing this. And again, you see that same divergence between the cost of a nutritious basket and the value of the grant constantly widening. Similarly, the SRD grant, which unlike the food poverty line, wasn't even linked to an objective measure of adequacy at its introduction. It was 350, which didn't have any relation to existing objective scientific measures we have of adequacy. But since then, it has only been increased once in its 6-year lifespan. So unlike all the other grants that usually at least see inflationary increases, it has remained in place, except for one 20 rand increase in April of 2024. And you'll see on the graph on the left that the red line is the value of the grant. That's stayed pretty stagnant, but the food poverty line that gets adjusted every year constantly is rising, and that gap is constantly widening there as well. And on the right, it's the SRD grant with the cost of an average nutritious basket for an adult, and you see that that gap too is constantly diverging. So what we're seeing is that social grants, while they were effective initially, the effectiveness at fighting food insecurity is being weakened because the value or the adequacy of these grants is falling relative to what they used to be in the past. Have there just some public education material that we had produced for UBIC, and I'll spend very little time on this, but basically what we did is we looked at the average basket that a social grant recipient would buy. And we compared, so from 2020, when it was first introduced, to 2025, last year, when we conducted this brief study. And what you see is that the amount of food that it buys has fallen quite a bit. So had it kept pace with inflation, it would have actually been around 430 rands in 2025. But now, because of the non-adjustments, it is actually only worth around 293, and that has real impacts on the food that people are able to buy. So in 2020, for example, you could buy a kg of frozen chicken pieces using the Social Relief of Distress grant. In 2025, you can only buy half of that, only 500 grams. And similar pattern for various food items that are consumed quite a bit by poor South Africans. So alongside issues with the value of the grant, we're also seeing rising issues with coverage gaps and exclusions that are rising from the social assistance system. So the largest gap that we have in South Africa still to this day is that there is no permanent income support for working-aged, able-bodied adults. So because the SRD grant remains temporary, and this has implications. So it has implications for the value of the Social Relief of Distress grant, because all the other grants, for example, will get inflationary increases at least a year. The SRD grant doesn't, because it is still treated as being a temporary measure, even though we've had it for the last 6 years. It also has implications for the way that the grant is administered, and I'll go into some research that we've conducted at the IEJ on exclusions in this grant. But the first thing to say there is that there are various estimates of what, or the population of South Africans that should be receiving the grant based on the eligibility criteria is. So how many adults in that 18 to 59 range that don't receive any other form of government support and don't have any, and aren't formally employed, earn below 624 rands, which is the current qualifying threshold. It's around 17.4 million. Other estimates that the Minister of Social Development has done puts it at 18. Some academics have it at 16, for example. But the way the SRD is budgeted for is money is only allocated for around 8 million people, which essentially means that there is a predetermined 50% exclusion rate built into the administration of the grant. And one of the regulations is that the money will be paid out until it runs out. But if it's only budgeted for 8 million, it's essentially predetermined that half of the people aren't going to receive the grant. So what we've done is we conducted research into the systematic exclusion in the SRD grant. We found that there are various barriers in that unique administration that it has that lead to many people being unfairly excluded. So one is an online-only application process that's also only in English in South Africa. So the way the SRD grant works, unlike all other grants, someone cannot walk into a SASSA office to receive help. They can't call a helpline in order to receive help on their grant. All the administration of it happens exclusively online and fully automated, which is a mismatch because 17.9% of South Africans have no access to the internet. And when we're talking about the poorest people, of course, that number would be likely much higher. There's also inaccurate income verification as part of this administration. So the SASSA relies on like automated bank account surveillance. They simply track how much income comes into a person's bank account every year because we don't have good information on what people's, very poor people's true incomes are, unlike you would for someone who works formally if they're part of SARS, for example. We found that that's also extremely inaccurate. Similarly, they also check people's information against government databases like UIF, but these, and the government has admitted to themselves, are widely inaccurate and cannot really pinpoint what someone's true economic status is at any point. And the result of this is we found that 9 out of 10 of people excluded from the SRD grant were in fact ineligible for the grant and in need of income support. The older standing grants have not had as acute issues when it comes to coverage gaps, but what we're seeing in the CSG, the child support grant, is that uptake for new infants is declining in recent years, and the proportion of children in poverty receiving the child support grant is also falling. Also so I did just say that we haven't had issues with coverage in the past, but we think that there's an emerging threat through what SASSA is terming a grant reviews campaign, but they've always done grant reviews, but they've changed the way that they're doing grant reviews in the last year through conditions that were placed on them by National Treasury, which were unprecedented. So never before has National Treasury said to SASSA, you have to do A, B, and C in order for us to give you the money. What this means is that they don't implement the conditions as National Treasury directs them to, then no one receives a grant and no SASSA employees get paid their salaries. And what these conditions require is they require SASSA to implement SRD-style income checks on all of these social grants. So the same ones that I just spoke about as being problematic and leading to exclusions in the SRD. So the bank verification, the government data, the credit bureau information. And what we've seen as a result of this is that around 70,000 people have already had their grants lapsed in the last financial year. But most of those people are not due to them being verified as ineligible. In other words, they did not sit down with an official and the official determined from the information that they provided that they actually have incomes above the qualifying threshold. Instead, most of these people are people who did not show up for review in the stipulated time. We believe that this isn't a non-random fact, and there's plenty of evidence to point to this. One is that the capacity of SASSA officers to conduct these in-person reviews is far exceeded by the scale at which the reviews have been pushed on them by National Treasury. In case at end of June last year, there were 210,000 people who were flagged for review in a single month. All of those people showed up to offices, and very few of them actually got help, and it led to SASSA actually adjusting or like weakening the time requirement for people to conduct their reviews. And I'll speak a bit more about the capacity of SASSA in a bit. But what National Treasury has and the government has as a result of these savings from these lapped grants is that they've reduced the social grant spending in the medium term. And I have a quote there from the budget review by National Treasury. Essentially, they made savings of 201 million last year from conducting these reviews. And yet for this current year, they project savings of 2 billion, which is over 10 times how much they actually saved last year. And a billion in the following year. Now, concern for this is that this projected savings isn't based on any evidence on the actual scale of grants that they've been able to cancel. And the risk of this is that SASSA will be forced to increase the scale of grant reviews. Meanwhile, their operating budget continues to shrink in real terms. And I have here, just very briefly, the points I've just made, but on the right is we've looked at SASSA's operating budget in real terms, the percentage change of that, and you'll see that from 2017, it's essentially been decreasing every single year, except for this year where it stayed exactly the same as what it was last year, but it's set to still decrease in the medium term. And so that's concerning because, of course, if they're going to be conducting accelerated reviews, they need more capacity in order to accommodate beneficiaries at their offices, and yet their budget continues to fall. And secondly, we also think that the social grant review campaign isn't being driven by evidence, because research that we've done on social welfare fraud shows that the majority of the fraud at SASSA on social grants is committed by officials, not beneficiaries. That statistic there is based on the last 10 years of us tracking annual reports. But what you find is that the measures and the conditions are being applied almost exclusively on beneficiaries. So what do we think should be the critical intervention that is implemented to deal with this? We think that basic income has to be, or could be a very powerful solution at dealing with issues around food insecurity. So there's plenty of research on how much cash transfers significantly impact various measures of nutrition. The Namibian Basic Income Pilot, for example, of 2008 found that undernourished children in a village where everyone received a basic income fell from 42% to 17% in a single year. Households never facing food shortages raised from 20% to 60%. Similarly, Kenya has been running a basic income pilot for years in multiple villages, and the results there, the preliminary results of those studies are also showing that things like protein consumption and food consumption are rising in all treated households. So the evidence is clear that basic income is one of the most direct and cost-effective social food security interventions available. We also have short-term demands on the government in order to address the issues around social assistance. So these are to immediately close the gaps. The child support grant and the CSG should be increased to at least the poverty line and linked to those, because that's an objective measure of adequacy. And if it's linked to it, it means it gets automatically adjusted every year when that poverty line sees inflationary increases. We're also calling for the removal of National Treasury's conditions on SASSA's allocation that unfairly victimize beneficiaries. We think that any expansion of the grant reviews process should be preceded by a credible plan on to address SASSA's capacity constraint and should be accompanied by support measures that increase access to beneficiaries to the review process. We're also calling for the transparency of how National Treasury is projecting 3 billion in savings, yet they'd only saved 201 billion from targeting people that they had already deemed to be the most suspicious. And then we're also calling for the unfair removal of procedural barriers in the SRD grant. But our main long-term solution is basic income, which I'll go through briefly on this, but it's outlined in our position paper, and we spent quite a bit of time in the written submission making reference to it. But what we're calling for is a basic income.
Sir, you are over your time.
All right.
I'm going to pause you here and hand over to the evidence leaders, and anything that you have not stated, maybe through your interaction with the evidence leaders, you'll be able to go through that. Thank you.
Very much. I just want to thank you for your submission and also your presentation. I just want to inquire from you, what precisely does universal mean? By definition, universal implies every person resident in South Africa, or all South African citizens, every person between 19 and 59 years old, or every person currently receiving the SRD grant? If you can just clarify that for me.
Okay, so universal, and the reason, so we focus specifically on the 18 to 59 age range, and the reason for that is that we already have the child support grant in South Africa, which is for, of course, between the ages of 0 and 18, and that already reaches 13 million children, so around 64% of children in South Africa. Similarly, we have the old age pension, which is for anyone above the age of 60. And those already have very good coverage. They're already well-established systems. We would not want to disturb those. Our proposal is to continue improving those and making sure they reach as many people as possible. But where the gap has been in our country has been in that 18 to 59 age range, which is why we focus specifically there. In terms of universality, it does mean that every South African would ideally receive the grant, but we obviously understand that that isn't something that's immediately possible. And so one of our proposals is for it to be progressively realized. We already have the Social Relief of Distress grant, which reaches around 8 million people. That's a good place to start. So you can take that, you can progressively raise the means test threshold as more funds become available. So our proposal is to first take it to the upper bound poverty line. It's currently at 624, which was the food poverty line in 2021. That poverty line has since been adjusted 5 times. So we're in a situation where you can have South Africans living in extreme poverty, under food poverty, because now it's 850, and still don't qualify for this support because that means test hasn't been adjusted. So our proposal is to take the means test to first 2,600, I forgot the exact figure of the upper bound poverty line, but take it there first, and then as more funds become available, you can say double it, so it's equal to 2 times the upper bound poverty line, then equal to the minimum wage, and then eventually progressively realized for everyone.
Thank you. And then in your submission, you also state that that grants should be pooled to support unemployed adults. So how would this transition to an individual-based UBI specifically prevent the dilution of children's nutritional needs and reduce the current rates of stunting and malnutrition? Remember, that's the purpose of this specific inquiry.
Yes, so we're not saying that grants should be pooled. What we're saying is they are pooled at household level. So what that means is, I'll give an example. So let's say there is a mother and a child, right? If the mother doesn't have any income of her own, then the only income source that that family of 2 has is the child's child support grant. Grants are pooled, meaning that, of course, in the way that the grants were designed, it was ideally that 580 goes completely to the child. But because of the reality that is grants are pooled at household level, on a per capita basis, it ends up being like 570 to the mom, or not 570, it would be 270 to the mom, 270 for the child. And that's a problem, and that's a problem that's driven mainly because of the gap that the mom doesn't receive her own permanent grant. It's also the case when you have the child support, the SRD, which is at a very low value, so it's 350, whereas the child's grant is 580, but again, they will pool it, so it's going to end up being like 800 and something and then divided by 2. So it ends up being diluted based off of the way the system currently works. If you have basic income and it's adequate and it's at the same level as the food poverty line, then as well as the child support grant, which is also what we're calling for simultaneously, then you don't experience that same kind of pooling. You can have experts that determine that a child needs 850 in order to live every month. You give the mother and the child both 850, you guarantee that that child is able to meet their most basic needs. But unfortunately, if you have this glaring gap in the social assistance system, the reality is those grants will be pooled at household level, and so you can increase the child support grant as much as you want. Without that support, it's going to continue being like smaller and smaller with the true effects, and it will limit how powerful it can be as a tool to mitigate malnutrition.
Thank you. I just want to comment on you had one slide where you compared what you were able to purchase, what average basket, and what are you able to purchase 3 years later or 5 years later. Can you also provide that evidence, and we will come at the end of the session to what else you can as supplementary add to your submission. I think that will be very interesting to look at the nutritional content and density of those baskets. And I recommend you on that. And then I just want to ask, in your submission, you also talk about preventing market capture. And you mentioned the risk of the UBI being captured by predominantly large retailers as profit. So beyond providing income, what specific regulatory or legislative reforms are required to ensure that food prices remain stable so that the UBI effectively increases nutritional intake? Sorry.
So that was based off of mainly what our expertise is with working with the grant system. So when we said capture, it was based mainly on the research that we had just done on fraud in the social assistance system. And there's one concerning, which I mean was a case that I'm sure most people are aware of, the Net1 case from a couple years ago, where social grants were essentially captured by big corporates that were marketing directly to people and then unfairly or deducting people's grants without people actually giving permission for that. So that's what we mean by the corporate capture. And similarly, it's also why we argue that it should be an income and not like a food basket or food vouchers. And the reason for that is, again, we don't think that those benefits, because they also have like very powerful economic stimulus effects, and those should be able to flow to communities. So people should be able to spend that income on an informal trader should they so wish. It shouldn't just be like specifically directed to supermarkets, for example. In terms of regulation, that's not my area of expertise, but I think that's why we have like prefaced it by saying that we aren't like, this isn't to say that there aren't issues in the food systems that need to be addressed. For example, one of my colleagues was here 2 days ago at the Institute for Economic Justice, because we also work on matters on food justice, and they gave evidence as part of the, I think it's the just transition of, or just food transitions on Tuesday at 8 a.m. And they, of course, we would not contradict any of that. So I don't think I have like specific regulations to address, but it is just to say that we don't see basic income as a solution that should displace regulations that will target food prices, but it should be complementary. Anyone to add?
Thank you so much. I want to congratulate you on a very insightful presentation. It really covers a lot of angles. And mine would be to just ask a little bit more of a snapshot into what the effects on the ground is on this increase in Treasury's audit process. So I want you to perhaps explain to the panel, how does that look for a grant recipient, a young mother on the ground? How did it look before this process was undertaken? And how does it look now? And I want you to take us into your confidence to explain to the Commission, what does that entail for a young mother in a rural area in the Eastern Cape? Step by step. Thank you.
I will let Kgotatso and Vincent, because they work directly with grant beneficiaries operating helplines.
Yeah, the evidence that the reflection that I will give, it's based in Limpopo, because those are the areas that we operate under, and bit of Northwest. Especially focusing on the current reviews, this is what we have picked up, a situation where a granny who stays in the area where they need to use a transport that is rental, sort of the van or the bakkies, to go and collect the payment. Contracting this transport, traveling for that particular 30 kilometers to the pay site that has been moved from the village, arriving there, trying to transact because they're expecting to receive the grant, and realizing that the money was not there. The first step that she thought, it is fraud. Somebody might have scammed the card. But immediately when they travel again, remember to rent the transport, that means...
I'm going to interrupt you. Just, it must be very annoying to hear that echo for you. Can we just figure out where the echo is coming from, colleagues? So it's okay. Apologies. I don't want you to be interrupted. Ne? I know.
I'll try to bear with it.
I'm so sorry. Over to you again, sir.
Yes, as I was saying, remember the first step you said, I will pay you when I get my grant money. Meaning there's an agreement between the transport driver and the beneficiary. Then arrival, there's no money. Then you're renegotiating that, can we proceed to a SASSA local office? This is where the older person realized that, no, actually you are due for review. The granny has not changed the contact numbers nor the address, meaning there was no communication that was sent prior, because it should be done 90 days before a review is taking place. That situation left us in tears when the granny says, is it anyone around here who can borrow me money so that I can pay the transport just to go back home, so that I can collect the documents that are needed for me to do a review? Meaning that the granny wants to pay off the debt and go home and think again, how do I go back to the SASSA local office to do the review process? Those are the situations faced with. On the CSG, we are seeing so many people who have been part of what we call the EPWP, now being subjected for review without prior notification, who find themselves at the pay site in the areas that are far-flung from where they used to be paid. Member SASSA decided to close local pay point, citing securities and expense in terms of cash transportation. But when people protested to say, we are not willing to travel into areas that are far away from our villages because it comes at the cost, nobody has got an extra money to budget for a next payment. So you find so many people having to be stuck in the areas where they are not familiar with, where they were expecting just to get the money. So we are seeing these cases coming into our national helpline where we can't even physically assist. And removing of the pay site meant that SASSA staff were supposed to be on the pay site to assist when are no longer there. So now people are carrying their private card, which they claim to have nominated as a method of payment, without any physical bank where they can enter and ask what is happening with my account, because most of the areas are full of pay site or merchants where a retailer would not be able to access on the system what is the problem. So the lack of support for the elder people and also the transport cost that is now paid by the beneficiary, that makes their life difficult, and it is people are now assuming that maybe I might be paid, let me take a risk. So it's no longer a clear communication that will I be paid, is it assured? It's more of saying, let me take a risk. If there is money, then I'm lucky now.
Before you answer, ma'am, perhaps you can supplement your answer also in terms of the CSG grant. My understanding is that these women now need to provide extra documentation in the process of this review. What does the extra documentation look like? And are they now burdened with going from department to department, from location to location, to fetch these documents? And what is the impact of that on that, I'm hypothetically speaking, the young mother now in Limpopo?
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Maybe let me just first start by adding on what my colleague Vincent said. And also Sianda mentioned the issue of review that started taking place last year, and the capacity that SASSA officers does not have to actually assist these beneficiaries that are due for reviews. We have, from our helpline, where people are calling in who were due for reviews last year October, last year November, but to date, they've not received their grant. This is besides them submitting all the required documents to a SASSA local offices, obviously incurring additional cost, moving to a SASSA local office to submit those documents. So to date, they've not received their payments. So the impact on the mothers or on child support grant. So for example, we already know that the child support grant is below the food poverty.
Can I just interrupt again on the echo? Is it perhaps one of your mechanisms, or are you maybe signed in on Teams? No one.
But it's coming from here, so I'm not behind us, so we're not sure.
Okay. I do apologize because what you are providing to the Commission is really important, and I don't want you to be interrupted by these processes. Oh goodness, there's maintenance going on as well. Commissioners, apologies for the interruptions. I'm going to ask for your indulgence, colleagues, from the submissions. I apologize for this interruption.
Noted, Commissioner. So the child support grant is currently at 560. We already know from our submission that it does not cater for the child's needs on a monthly basis. So now, if this grant is due for a review, meaning that the mother has to move from one office to the other to submit supporting documents. For example, if they say that there is an income coming in, they would obviously have to go to where they were working, EPWP, where they were working so that they could submit the supporting document. They would have to go to the bank so that they can submit the supporting documents. And one thing that we already know is that government system are outdated, one, two, are not on time. So for example, even if a mother was employed 3 months ago, it will still reflect as if she is employed, although she's not employed. We've seen that with the SRD grant, whereby people are flagged on a system, although they're not employed. The UIF system is one of the many that people are flagged. Currently, the NFC system, also where people are flagged. So let me go up to the SRD grant, where an 18-year-old just finished matric and now applies for this SRD grant, find out that the grant is already active. So it means that there were fraud that took place on that particular individual's ID number. So now there's no recourse for this particular individual to submit. They can't go into a SASSA local office because the system is fully online. The call center is not accessible, where these applicants can now say, submit their supporting documents there. So those also another issue. The issue that also the SRD grant is means tested as at 624, but currently we know from the helpline that even if people receive 200 rand, they will still be declined. So those are the challenges that beneficiaries are indeed facing on the ground.
Thank you so much. That is really valuable to understand the real life experiences, because from my side, what I'm hearing is an intention by Treasury to address fraud on the one hand, as your submission today indicated, and submissions we've also received previously, is that fraud is more a concern that is reflecting on the officials of the department vis-a-vis the recipients. Thank you for that. Now, my second deduction of your submission is that there are now several extra steps that vulnerable communities need to follow in order to maintain this administrative burden that Treasury has now imposed on SASSA. My follow-up question to that is, so what you've indicated is that instead of increasing SASSA capacity to address these administrative implications from this review, in fact, the SASSA offices and the resources from SASSA has gone down, and it has moved online. Now, what I also heard from your side is that you have a national helpline. May I request then, through you, Chairperson, that the Commission also receives the complaints, with the permission of your complainants, to see the scope of the concerns, because again, this would allow us to have a snapshot of real experiences. What we don't want to do is sit with theoretical assumptions. Real life experiences from these vulnerable communities, the mothers, the grannies, like you've indicated, would be really valuable for us, because we are speaking about human rights here: dignity, equality, access to social care. So I want to again thank you for this rich submission. And with that, Chairperson, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you. Evidence leaders, Commissioner Kwinana.
Thank you so much, Chair. Yeah, I think, the universal basic income is something that is very important, and especially when one has regard to the people that are supposed to receive it. These are the most vulnerable members of our communities. And what really touched me is the story that you then told about an older person who had to go back home in order to collect the documents, but then at a cost, and then come back again. Obviously would have borrowed more money. Now, just looking at what she's going to receive against, the debt that she would have created for herself. Yeah, it's troubling. But what would you then say, what can be done? I hear you with regard to the fact that these offices have closed. The offices have closed because they're afraid that they're going to be robbed of money. But do they need to keep money at, at those offices in order just for them to access documents from members of the communities, especially our older persons? In terms of elections, IEC has gone above and beyond to say we can even go to you, and so that we can get you registered and get you ready for you to be able to vote. Why are we not thinking that far, even with social grants, to say, can we not make sure that we protect these older persons? I mean, the act is clear. They need to be protected more than anyone else because they are vulnerable. And I don't think it should just even end there. Even with persons with disabilities, the same can even be applied, And maybe then those that are able, but they can go further. But at least with these older persons, what do you think we can do? Babus Kosan, I see you already.
Yes, there is a different kind of behavior here. I'll compare what SASSA has done and what the private sector that has got interest in terms of paying grant beneficiaries. There's a company called Easy Pay Everywhere. The pay site was closed in a place called Hamamadi in Daibosh in Limpopo. SASSA has cited that no, due to the issue of security, we will close the pay site, and then people will have to go to either Dendron or to All Pay. So now grant beneficiaries have to spend 50 rand a single trip to All Pay to collect money. But this private company took the same risk and said, we will go Hamamadi to pay, because there will be charges there. They will gain more interest in terms of charging the grant beneficiary extra for using their own material. So that is where the question is. In terms of the safety of the people, does it matter when we have to spend as a government to them in terms of giving them what is due to them in terms of cash? And the same example you're citing, when it comes to election, they will go even places where no transport will drive in, but they will be there and make sure that they preach the same, that we care for you, your safety is important. So that is where the interests lie, that the government wants to save at the cost of the elder people and children. because most of the young mother, they travel with their children to those far places at the risk of saying, at least if we get this money, it doesn't matter about our safety. So that is where the problem is, saving at the expense of the beneficiaries. And the projection that the Treasury is saying we want to save more at whose life?
Yeah.
That is where we're saying, can we save cost from the unauthorized people who are entering the system rather than punishing the people who want to buy basic services?
So in fact, you're actually punished as a poor person because you still have to go and get these funds at a cost, money that you don't have. In fact, I'm reminded of an area in Northwest. This would be next to Bray. What is that area? Murukeng, yes, Murukeng. So in that area, they are saying they have to go to Freiberg. And that costs them 150 and 150 back. Already you've lost 300 rand. What is left of that money? So it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So I was just thinking about it. What of these council members that we have in the different communities? These are people that are supposed to be on the ground, that must have a relationship with all the members of the communities. Not only that, we've got municipalities in each and every area. Why can't we use them optimally? Why can't we use them to be the ones to make sure that people can get into a safe place so that they can get these funds without them spending anything? Because we know most of the shops that they are going to want to access, they are not there. If they are there, they are expensive. Or they are going to be charging them in order for, if you're supposed to buy meal for 20 rand, you're going to buy it for 40 rand. Because they'd give you early so that when you come back, now you just always, it's a vicious cycle, really. So, yeah, I would want you to think about what else can be done, in order to just assist, but also to use this number of institutions that we have as a country. I still say that we've got lots of laws that it would seem we are not using enough as a country, and that we can tap into in order to ensure that, we salvage a number of things that exist out there. But thank you so much for a presentation, and I must also say that it's so pleasing to hear from young people talking about older persons. For me, what it says is you are preparing for your own future. It will never affect any of the older persons now, but I can tell you that it is a legacy that you are writing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Kwinana. Commissioner Ntuli?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the coalition for your presentation. It's much appreciated. A key task for this inquiry, centering on the right to food, is a proper diagnosis of the problem in order to be able to assist us in then making the correct policy recommendations and policy interventions when it comes to universal access to food, which is, as you know, a problem for many in South Africa. And the task for us over these few days that the inquiry is sitting is then to hear from the various stakeholders what you identify as the problem. Many stakeholders, in identifying the problem, have noted what many are calling a paradox between on the one hand, a surplus production of food in this country, and then on the other hand, a lack of access to this food by many. From what we are hearing from you, the problem of hunger then becomes less about the access to the surplus and more about income and the lack of income thereof. This shifts for us in understanding the problem. It shifts the focus from production and supply to then purchasing power and to a large extent dignity. Given this position by the coalition, are you able then to further assist us in understanding this position towards then policy interventions? If hunger is primarily an income problem, what role should structural reforms in the food system, such as corporate concentration that we have heard over the past few days, or agricultural practices that we also heard yesterday in the presentations that we received yesterday, what role do these structural factors play if income is the problem and not the distribution of or the equitable distribution of the surplus?
So I think for us, I think the income issue, I wouldn't say is necessarily different from the other issues around access. I think it's part and parcel of it, because income is of course what people are using in order to access that surplus, and if they don't have incomes, then they also aren't able to access it. So I think it's the final step. So if there's issues in the food system, for example, that are leading to higher food prices for people, it has an impact on how much people can access, and that has to be fixed. But ultimately, the final access for most people depends on their income. So even if you do, say, deal with issues in the food system, you're able to stabilize food prices. Prices rarely ever go down, right? Inflation maybe will slow, and that will improve access for people who already have incomes. But for those who don't have any incomes, you don't improve their access in any way. So I think that's where our submission comes in. It's not necessarily to say that there aren't systemic issues in the food systems and those shouldn't be dealt with, but it's to say that the lack of income, and especially if the social assistance system is deteriorating, it will undermine the final result. If we deal with food prices, we deal with conglomerate unfair pricing, if people still aren't able to access the food in the final place, because income is that mechanism. So I think the recommendation ideally for us would look something like it did in the Eastern Cape in the malnutrition issue, where there's a range of recommendations that deal with the food systems and food access issues, but then there's also a clause there directed National Treasury and DST to work specifically together in order to raise the child support grant. So we're saying that those are all issues, those all affect access, but income is as well, because income is the way that most people are accessing food at the end of it. So I think that there are issues, they have to be dealt with, and I stress that urgency, but it's just to say that income also has to be considered, because it's how most people are accessing in the end of the day.
No, thank you for that. So how effective then does income support become, particularly when one considers the reality of continuously rising food prices? So we apply a universal basic income grant and food prices continue to rise. Would then the logic not be then you are going to continue to then have to increase also the support mechanism given the rising food prices?
That is true, yes, and I think that is, I think, why exactly we think that the issues are connected. Because of course, if food prices are rising very fast, then the income is deteriorating faster. But it's to say that, number one, the way you can construct income support in a way that's rational and fair, for example, tying it to objective measures of need. So for example, if it's tied to the basket of a nutritious basket to feed a child, for example, that immediately responds to the increase in food prices, because if the cost increases maybe, or the food poverty line increases to 950 next year, the grant also increases to 950. It's an immediate way to deal with that. While then there are also other mechanisms that are employed to deal with the cause of the food prices in the beginning. So essentially income is, that's why we say it's the most immediate way and the easiest source, not necessarily in that it's the only one and the only one that will be effective, but to respond to immediate crises in food prices, I think income is the most effective in that instance, because if we know prices have risen, we can immediately respond by giving people more money. And I think COVID illustrated this perfectly, because what happened during the first stage of lockdown is once everything was shut down, the government immediately responded by adding top-ups to all of the grants, because that's the first tool of defense essentially we have for food security. So I think a lot of the issues are structural and they'll take time, but income is the most immediate response you can have. Of course, we can't depend on it constantly increasing, that would be bad. But just for, the immediate response, it's there.
No, thank you for that. The last question for me is to further complicate this position. Your position is that to deal with the immediate problem of rising food prices, you do so by increasing income. But if you have already identified the problem not being the availability of the food, you've got surplus food, but it's just not being distributed equitably to reach the majority. Is the more effective immediate response not to give people money, but to ensure that the food that is available in surplus reaches them? In other words, if I do not have a job and I am a possible recipient of this universal basic income grant, as an immediate response to my lack of access to food, would ensuring a sustained availability of nutritious food to me not address the issue of then immediate income? That would be my last question.
I understand the question. And I think it comes down to the mechanism through which people are accessing. Because I would also love a situation where like food wasn't entirely commodified and there were direct ways for us to get food to people in need without them having to pay for it. And I think that was one of the things that were discussed by my colleagues who are here on Tuesday. But the reality that we live in is that most people have to access it through the market. And so a lot of that food surplus, the only way in order to do it in the current economic formation that we have is that people have to use income in order to buy food, in order to get that food to them. So, we would be in favor of mechanisms that, say, directly give food to people. But I don't think that that's necessarily the reality that we live under, because it's a market economy, and so you're mainly accessing food directly through the market. I think we would also not be in favor, for example, of some of those mechanisms to directly tie to people if they're still linked to market. So for example, if you said people get food vouchers instead of giving them direct income, we would still be in opposition to that, because that is still a market mechanism, and that is what I think would, for example, end up advantaging people who are more formalized and supermarkets and conglomerates. We would be in that case in favor of income directly. I think even when it comes to food parcels, and food parcels, especially again in a market economy, because the way a lot of food parcels would currently work is they don't go straight from the farm into parcels into people's households. They go from the farm to supermarkets, and then we have to procure them from supermarkets in order to give them to people directly, which is also something that we think causes a lot of inefficiencies, one. And two, it's also very paternalistic in many ways, because it almost assumes that the people who aren't without money don't actually understand what, for example, nutritious food is, and so we have to dictate to them what that looks like. But the research, which I think we presented and hopefully was convincing, and why cash transfers work so well versus like giving people like in-kind transfers is because people already understand what nutritious food looks like. They know what's good for them. The issue is they can't afford to buy it. So yeah, I think for me, I agree, but I think that unfortunately the mechanism of that delivery is limited by the market economy that we currently live under.
Thank you so much. Now, I hear the presentation of a universal income, and I think the evidence is try to have a conversation around it. Is the problem not one, unemployment in South Africa, the high levels of unemployment? Therefore, we should not be creating a system of independence, but people then being able to secure employments and employments which are then meeting at least at the minimum, the national minimum wage, to allow people then to be able to support themselves, but to also give them that dignity that I've done this with my own hands, and at the end of the cycle, I'm able to earn this. How do we then balance that, reducing unemployment, therefore also speaking about economic inequality?
I think the answer to that would be to say that I think first we need to understand the scale of unemployment that we have in our country. Right, it's 42.1% broad unemployment rate, over 30% official unemployment rate. The level of job creation that we need is absolutely massive. We would need growth rates sustained of around 6% per annum a year in order to reach full employment by like 2035, for example. So I think the reality is we're far from that, right? And so it becomes an immediate mechanism in the interim, but also to say that basic income is important, it's not a substitute for the labor market. And I think I want to talk, for example, about caregivers, full-time caregivers, like people who opt not to participate in the labor market or cannot do so because they've got caregiving responsibilities. I think those are people we would still need to care for, even in a situation of full employment, because we believe like that income security, the access to food, should be a universal right. And what that means is it should not be necessarily tied to someone's ability to immediately access the labor market, because not everyone can and not everyone wants to work, one. Two, I would say that in the way that grants currently function,
Said something, you said not everyone is able to work, and then not everyone wants to work.
yes,
Now, how do you, because we can't then have people who are choosing not to work then being subsidized by government. And I understand and those who are working through payment of tax. I understand the analogy you give of a care worker, and that can be formalized. There are processes that we can take. You go to government, fill out the form, and explain this process. My question is, how do we, and it's a balancing exercise. We have on one hand, high levels of unemployment. You then have the middle class that often feels squeezed by having to, through tax, have to then subsidize the unemployment. Would it not be better to create employment through various government programs and incentives, which then cover the unemployed, but also then have programs that say you are unable to work due to disability, due to the fact you're a primary caregiver of someone who's disabled, to ensure that people have that dignity of saying, I'm employed, I'm able to participate in the cycle, because then we are creating the cycle. And when does the cycle end of people being highly reliant on government for economic opportunities?
so I guess maybe there's a fundamental, disagreement there, because like our belief is that like human rights shouldn't be conditional. Right? It should not, like your access to food, your access to income security is a fundamental human right. It's a constitutional right that shouldn't be dependent on you having to perform certain behaviors in order to access that. And I guess maybe there's no real way to reconcile that other than to say we truly believe that they should be universal. And universality means that you don't categorize some people as being more deserving of help than others. For example, in healthcare, we don't perform those same type of mechanisms. We don't say at a hospital, we're only going to treat you if you work, because otherwise you're like leeching leeching off of the state. We treat everyone because human rights are universal in that way. And I believe it, at least fundamentally, to the core. And then I think to the question about government employment programs, I think again there, these aren't like substitutes for each other, they're complementary. The first thing to understand is that it's extremely, like let's just look at the cost that it is to say hire someone through an EPW program versus the cost of a basic income. Because you also don't want to hire people to work for 370 rands a month, you want to pay them a living wage. So if you have to pay people 2.5, 3,000, 3.5, you can only really create a very limited scale of employment for people, which is kindly what we're doing. It's a balancing act. You don't entirely remove income support and feed all of that into public employment programs, because no public employment program is creating 8 million jobs or 10 million that pay a living wage. And so it's important to have that in place. I think the benefit also of having income security not as a substitute for like public works programs is you can also rotate people in and out of public employment, because someone can work for 6 months, then you can take them off of that, they've gotten the experience, they can now start searching for work, you give someone else an opportunity to find those skills, but in the interim you're not starving them because you ensure that they at least have enough food. So I think, and this is what a lot of like experts on public employment programs, the positions they take too, I know Dr. Kate Phillip, for example, at Presidency, this is her stance as well, is to say public employment programs should never be substitute for social protection. And in fact, social protection enhances the effectiveness of public employment in the way that it's built. I think finally, I want to say, and I think this is the point I was trying to make earlier, which is just to say that in terms of the research, so while there are those people who opt not to work, and I believe that they should still be supported, social protection also assists in labor market outcomes. So there's research, for example, let's think of the cost that it takes to search for work. That's not free. And people are using their grants in order to pay for that. So you can pay for CVs, you can pay for transport. That's a complementarity, right? You lose that, and it's a way for people to like guarantee themselves at least some kind of access into the labor market. So they work together, and they also don't discourage work, because again, 350 or 370 is not enough for anyone to live on. Everyone wants to work minimum wage. The reason we have unemployment in South Africa is not because people are choosing not to work, it's because there simply aren't enough jobs. And most people, even with my earlier characterization standing, would still opt for a job. It's just that they don't have those, and I think those people do like deserve the support. So I would say, yeah, I said a lot, so
Thank you so much. I have so many questions based on what you're saying, and I'm looking at time, and it's 10 o'clock. So what we're going to do is the panel will write further questions, send it to yourselves, and then in your supplementary submissions, you'd answer the questions, but also then just add the complaints that you receive in terms of your hotline, but also perhaps what I also need to understand is the research in terms of the usage of child social grants as well as older persons grants. We need, because often the misconception or the conception is then in the public eye is that one, the children are not necessarily getting the benefit of the social grant. Mothers use it for other they misuse it, let me say that. Perhaps what we need to do is get the numbers, the research, so that as part of our report, we can have that conversation about how the social grant is used, and conversations around what is the best middle ground to ensure that the beneficiaries of those social grants are supported and protected by government. Thank you so much. You are duly excused from the witness podium. Thank you. The submissions must be made on or before the 6th of April. Yeah, thank you. Minute, 5-minute comfort break.
testing.
Good morning. Thank you so much. We're back after that short comfort break. We now have the minister. I need to get this right because they have now a new department. The Minister for Rural Development and Land Reform. Is it the other way around? See, is it the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development? Thank you so much for that correction. Good morning, Minister, and your team once again. We will proceed by just, Minister, through you, having you introduce yourself as well as your team. Thereafter, as well as the roles they play in the department. Thereafter, I will then, through you, ask you if you will make the presentation as well as, or alternatively, if someone else will be making the presentation. I note that from the commission side, we have not received your written submission, so we will then perhaps have to go through that. But through you, Minister, introductions of the team as well as you, starting with yourself.
Thank you, and morning to the commissioners, and morning to everyone. My name is Mzwanele Nyonso, the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development. On my left is Acting DG of the department, Mr. Clinton Hyman. We have Mr. Tumisan Lupungela, the acting DDG, Corporate Support Services. We have Advocate Kalipile Sizani, the legal advisor to the minister. And we have Professor Gilingwe Mayende, the special advisor to the minister. And we have Carlis, yeah, from the deeds office. And then OVG, Matlate. All these ones are from OVG and deeds office. Peter from the commission. Office of the Valuer General. Yes, and then the Land Restitution Commission, the last one. Thank you.
May I ask, Minister, will you be making the presentation or will you be making opening remarks and then handing over to the acting DG or alternatively someone from the team?
I'll be making a statement and then we'll take it from the commission.
Thank you, because as I said, we don't have
Yeah.
any submissions from the department.
Yes.
And I think because we don't have any written submission from the department, we would have to ask you to go through answering the questions that we sent through our letter extensively so that the evidence leaders are able perhaps at this short notice to ask questions. And then once you've made your statement, will then the acting DG and other representatives from the departments be answering questions?
In fact, Chair, the statement is the apology on our side. Yes, and then we take it from there. It's almost the apology we send to you, but we wanted to read it on record, and then we get guidance from the commissioners.
Okay. So there's no submission. Even today, you will not be making any submissions. Right. So for procedural aspects, given the fact that you're saying you're going to only be making a statement, Minister, can I ask you to stand so that I can swear you in or affirm you in? We'll listen to the statement and then we'll take it from there. Once again, Minister, full names for the record.
Mzwanele Nyonzo.
Will you be taking the prescribed oath or affirmation?
Oath.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you see that the evidence you're about to present before the commission is the truth, nothing but the whole truth? If so, raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
You're duly sworn in, Minister. You may sit down and present your statement.
Thank you, Commissioner. And greetings once more. This is the request for postponement on the statutory subpoena. National Investigative Hearing into Food Systems in South Africa. The Department of Land Reform and Rural Development acknowledges receipt of the statutory subpoena issued in terms of Section 15 of the South African Human Rights Commission Act. In respect of the National Investigative Hearing into Food Systems, the department wishes to express its sincere apology for the difficulty occasioned in meeting the timelines stipulated for appearance and submission on the 6th February 2026. Because the email address that was used by the Commission is an old email that was used when the two departments were combined. The department only became aware of the matter on the 4th March 2026 when the Commission sent a reminder, and the subpoena was only received on the 9th March 2026 when the department started to be seized with the matter. The subpoena requires appearance or submission by 18 March 2026, which has presented significant operational constraints within the department. The institutional context. The Commission is advised that the department underwent a structural reconfiguration effective 1st April 2025, resulting in the separation of the former Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development into distinct institutional mandates. This reconfiguration has had material implications for the consolidation of information previously held across combined functions. The allocation of responsibilities between the departments and the availability of complete verifiable data within the current departmental mandate. The department is therefore required to undertake a careful reconciliation process to ensure that any submission made to the Commission is accurate, based on audited and verified records, and properly reflects the current mandate of the department. Commitment to the Commission. The department wishes to state unequivocally that this request is not a refusal to comply with the subpoena. The department, recognizing the authority of the Commission and its constitutional mandate to promote, protect, and monitor human rights, and the importance of the inquiry into food systems as it relates to the right of access to sufficient food in terms of Section 27(1)(b) of the Constitution. The department remains fully committed to cooperate with the Commission in a manner that is meaningful, complete, and aligned with its constitutional obligations. Request for postponement. Considering the above, the department respectfully requests postponement of the scheduled appearance and submission date. The purpose of this request is to enable the department to consolidate information across the former combined mandate, align responses with the current departmental mandate, and ensure that submissions are fully supported by audited and verified documentation. The Commission should also note that some of the functions of food security were transferred to the Department of Agriculture. The department submits that this approach will better assist the Commission in its inquiry, as it will ensure that the information provided is reliable and capable of supporting the Commission's findings. The department has tried its level best to compile the requisite documents during the limited time at its disposal, but realized that it will not be able to present them by 18 March 2026. To enable the Commission to prepare accordingly for a full engagement with the Minister and Department. Notwithstanding the above, the Minister, this was yesterday's dilemma when we were faced with double booking for the appearance at the Commission and the Portfolio Committee of Land Reform and Rural Development. Proposed way forward. The department proposes that a revised date be agreed upon in consultation with the Commission, with a reasonable period that allows for the proper preparations of submission. The department remains available to engage with the Commission at any time to facilitate this process to ensure alignment on expectations. The department reiterates its apology for any inconvenience caused and emphasizes that this request is made in the interest of ensuring a credible, accurate, and constitutional compliant submission. The department respectfully requests the Commission's consideration of this postponement. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Minister, I'm going to allow my fellow panelists to ask questions, and then I will come in after. I'll start with you, Commissioner Ntuli. Any questions? Commissioner Kunene, any questions?
Thank you so much, Chair. Minister, you say on the 4th of March 2026, that's when the department became aware of the subpoena. So to whom was it delivered?
Or should I? No, yes, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. The 9th, was the subpoena date. But I'm taking responsibility, Commissioner, because it was received on the 4th but we only heard that, I only heard that 2 days ago, that it was received on the 4th. But I'm taking responsibility because it was received by by somebody from the department.
Yes. No, I understand that, Minister, but it would be important to just, receive the details insofar as where is the shortcomings in terms of the department.
Yeah.
So it would be important then, Minister, for you to inform us if it came on the 9th, to whom was it then delivered?
Yes.
It can't be somebody who has not been sworn in, unfortunately. He can maybe whisper to you, Minister, because then it means Minister is compromised. He doesn't have the information, Madam Chair.
No, Chair, okay. No, it was received by the Chief of Staff in my office. And unfortunately, he did not communicate with all of us. When we asked him 2 days ago, he said it fell through the cracks. So,
All right. Minister, you recall that when you started, you said it was an email that
yes,
had been used previously when both departments were existing
for last
jointly.
year. Yes, that's what they
Right.
said, yes.
All right. And then ultimately on the 9th, it does come to your office, except the person who received it did not forward the information to you.
Yes.
All right.
And
So,
to
Minister,
the,
are
and,
there...
to, and to the DG.
And to the DG. All right. So, but do you have communication measures in place that would allow you to be in the receipt of such information?
You see, because we're working with trust within ourselves, you don't believe that information cannot reach you. And when that happens, you start thinking about, okay, let me fix my office. There is something wrong in terms of communication.
So this, you've now realized that there are lacunas in terms of your systems
Yes.
that would need to be addressed.
Yes.
All right. So Minister, you say it's only 2 days ago
Yes.
that it was then brought to your attention.
Yes.
Was this by the same Chief of Staff?
No, it was brought by the DG and DDG. When they received the information, they started calling me. They called me. I was in Cape Town. They informed me about the subpoenas, but they knew that I was also going to present to the portfolio committee.
So at what point did the DG and the other person get to know of this subpoena?
Sunday, they received it on Sunday.
Sunday would be the
9, is it 15?
the 15th.
Yeah.
And it's brought to your attention 2 days ago.
Yes.
So counting down from today.
Yes.
So this
Le-
would
le-
be
le-
on the 17th,
Yeah. It
No?
came to me 3 days ago, I think.
3 days
night, yeah.
ago now. All right.
Because
Okay.
yesterday I was saying 2 days ago.
Okay, thank you, Minister. So, Minister, now your immediate reaction to this. Obviously, this subpoena does allude as to who's the chair of the subpoena that would have penned
Yes.
his signature on the document. Now, your attempts in ensuring that there's communication between your office with the chair of the inquiry, when were those done? Were they even done?
Yes, immediately when I've heard of the subpoena, in fact, I was shocked. And I was trying I wanted to see if we can't come and not attend the portfolio committee. And then, of course, the portfolio committee was postponed 3 times because of the cabinet meetings. Because portfolio committees are also on Wednesdays, and cabinet are also on Wednesdays. So I've been apologizing to the portfolio committee, and this time they were saying, no, you need to come here. I had to apologize to the cabinet and go to the portfolio committee. Now, I wanted to get the deputy minister to attend the portfolio committee so that I come here and explain this situation. but unfortunately the Deputy Minister is off sick.
Yes.
When we tried to conduct the commission, we even called the chairperson of the commission to explain this predicament.
All right. Yeah. But this is a subpoena. The effect thereof, does the minister understand it?
I do.
Yes.
That is why I was so shocked and worried. And I really wanted to come physically and present this apology and present these facts.
And we really appreciate, Minister, that you are here ultimately. But you see, the concern is this, Minister, is that the subpoena does stipulate the person that you can be in contact with in order for you then to relay your concerns or even an application for a postponement, as you say.
Yes.
But it would seem that that from your office was not done, at least by yourself or anyone else from your office, except then it would seem you decided to go to the chair of the commission.
No, we did not do that, Chair. Commissioner, we immediately wrote back this apology that I'm reading here. We sent it straight to the chair immediately when we saw the subpoenas. All this apology as it is.
The
We
chair
wrote-
of the inquiry?
We wrote yes.
The chair of the inquiry.
Wait, yeah, let me check here. Yes, it was done on the 19th to Commissioner Sandra.
To Commissioner
Yes.
Makwasha.
Yes.
Do you also have the time when this was sent?
But it was on the 19th, let me check.
On the 19th,
18th, on
Minister?
the 18th, sorry.
18th
On the
rather.
18th, yeah.
that would have been yesterday.
Yes, yes.
All right. Do you perhaps have the time, Minister?
No, I don't have the time, unless we can go to the emails now.
All right, all right. Okay. So Minister, you also appreciate that we are a Chapter 9 institution, Minister, and we are there to support constitutional democracy. In fact, Minister, it is to support your office so that it can be effective. It can also work optimally in order to be able to ensure that you meet your mandate insofar as the government is concerned. Now, when you are not able to come, Minister, it sort of defeats the entire purpose for which the institution was intended. Do you appreciate that,
I
Minister?
do, Commissioner, I appreciate it, and hence this sincere apology, because this would also give me an opportunity to tell the world, to tell the country exactly what we are doing. So this opportunity, there was no way I was going to try and run away from it, because it also helps the department to go out there and explain exactly the mandate of the department and what we are doing as the department. So I appreciate that, and hence this sincere apology.
Yeah. And also, Minister, you accept that currently, and even last year, as different institutions, we face with budget cuts. Now, just to organize this type of a process is very costly on the commission side. And now you are requesting for a postponement, which will then mean that as a commission, we're supposed to try and find funds from somewhere to again organize this type of an engagement. What do you say to that, Minister?
I understand, but as I'm saying, hence the apology. I'm also having difficulty to explain on the question of budget, because, I understand.
Now, I was hoping you'd say, Minister, you'll then fund the engagement. Because fortunately for us, this morning, we have you as the political head of this department. And maybe you can say, no, you can put funds aside and you can secure a place for us.
No,
You
it
can
would be-
secure all, we've got so many stakeholders that we need to engage. It is report writers, evidence leaders, it is their traveling, it's their accommodation, it is the cameramen there who are recording for us. It is our, we now have the 12th official language. It is to ensure that persons with disabilities are also accommodated. We have to secure their services. So it's a number of logistics that requires to be, taken into account in order to have this type of an engagement. So, Minister, it's something that hopefully you can think about.
Yeah.
But let me come to the presentation. Now, Minister, you say, despite you knowing of this, of the information you currently have, there is no way that you'd even attempt to try and respond to the different themes that have been alluded to in terms of the subpoena. It won't be possible,
It
at
won't
least
be
not
possible.
this morning.
It won't be possible, Commissioner, because we really want to be accurate in terms of information and make sure that we give you what we're doing to your, also your best satisfactory. But let me go back a bit to the question of resources. I must again apologize and inform the Commission that, for example, today, I'd invited the whole community of Mzimkhulu because the President is going there tomorrow with me to hand over land. Then there are communities next to that community who are threatening to picket outside the President because of land issues. So I'd invited all those communities, including catering and transportation, and I had to cancel that meeting because I had to be here, because I take this commission very seriously. So I feel I must just raise that with the commission. Yes, but as I'm saying, we want to submit documents so that the commissioners go through the documents, prepare themselves to ask questions to us so that we come and present accurate information.
Thank you for that, Minister. But do you perhaps have a time frame that you have considered to say at least by this time the department would be ready with its submissions, so that as we think about at what point do we have any second leg, if it will be possible? Have you thought about that? At what
Yes.
point do you think that you can be ready with the submissions? Regard being heard, Minister, to the time frame that you had been given as at the time when the proceedings started in terms of the first letter.
No, well, I've considered the time. I think in 2 weeks' time we can be ready. That is 14 days. We can be ready to submit all the documents to the Commission.
Thank you so much, Minister. Chair, that's how far I can take it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Kwinana. Minister, because of the reference to the Chief of Staff in respect of receiving correspondence from the Commission, I think I'd like to perhaps address some of my questions to the Chief of Staff. So therefore, I'd request to swear in the Chief of Staff so that he or she is able to answer in terms of when he received the subpoena, when he communicated same to you, as well as, because my concern here, Minister, is you're giving us the 6th of February, the 4th of March, as well as the 9th of March. It seems that sufficient time and correspondence from our side was noted, and it seems that there was no urgency to, one, respond to the correspondence and address any, and it can't be that on the 18th of March, when you're supposed to appear, correspondence is sent and a request is sent to for a postponement. It can't be that. And what is concerning, Minister, is that your counterpart, the Minister of Agriculture, had sent his presentation and was available to make oral submissions. So I'm trying to understand where the difficulty lies with your department specifically. So I'm requesting that the Chief of Staff be sworn in.
Unfortunately, Commissioner, he is not here. He is in Mzimkhulu already for the meeting that was planned. So he is not part of this meeting.
So, Minister, you didn't cancel the meeting, you delegated someone
But
in
the
your office.
communities don't want anyone except me. We are going there because the President must find us there tomorrow morning. So everybody is, even the DG had to take a flight this morning from Mzimkhulu.
Everyone is here except the Chief of Staff who's central to this lack of improper communication with the Commission. It's quite concerning, again, that the person who is responsible or is alleged to be responsible for this is not before us, and therefore we are unable as the panel to address questions to him. so that he's able to provide the commission with clarity. I thought, Minister, that given the letter and the subpoena, as well as the questions we had asked, your department would come and make oral submissions and then undertake to provide us with supplementary submissions, given the fact that Commissioner Kunen has raised it. It's budget, but also we're talking about a very important conversation, the right to food, food systems. And South Africans are saying, Commission, to the Commission, we are hungry. And it can't be that we all then postpone it to a later date without any accountability from the department in terms of poor communication and from the Commission.
Yes, Commissioner, I agree with you. In fact, honestly, as I've said earlier, I was so frustrated. And I felt after this appearance, I'll have to fix the communication within my own office. And yeah, I don't want to talk a lot about it, but I have to fix the communication within my own office. There is something that is not right. And it reflects badly on me.
Thank you so much. The panel just finalized deliberating. Given the fact that the Chief of Staff is absent and we would like to hear from him, Minister, we are recommending that the Chief of Staff prepares an affidavit to be sent to the Commission. The written submissions from the department be submitted on or before the 2nd of April 2026. In your written submission, Minister, we'd also like for you to reply and address the Commission on how you are going to, one, address this issue in terms of the miscommunication, in terms of consequence management within the department. Because in terms of the Constitution, we are a constitutional democracy. We to assist each other and hold each other accountable. A Chapter 9 institution through various means, communicated with it, and we have not received anything at all, with the exception of the yesterday's letter. And it seems that at the center of this is the chief of. Because we are going to try now, with our very limited budget, we get less than all departments. So we have to now try and see how we're going to have the second leg of this inquiry. We'll communicate same to the minister's office. And perhaps as you are, the commission must communicate with to avoid subpoenaing you, Minister. Yeah. But now I'm cautioning you as the chairperson that you are not excused from the witness table. You are going to be warned to come again at a later stage, but in the interim, we want the affidavit as well as your written submissions on or before the 2nd of April, 2026.
Thank you, Chair. I accept that. I'm not sure if the Chair, because I'm also advised that for us to get, by the way, the actual subpoena, the sheriff served the legal person within the department, Mr. Chokwe. Not sure if the commission would also want Mr. Chokwe to do his own affidavit.
We would.
Yeah.
So that we'd understand what, in terms of communication, what happened so that we are here. So that is the position of the panel and the commission. Minister and your team, you're duly excused until you are appearing before us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, we are going to ask for the representatives from the African Cultural Heritage Trust, the representatives, if they are appearing in person, to come forward. If they are appearing virtually, just to switch on their cameras. Thank you, sir. Just welcome to the witness podium. introduce yourself briefly as well as the role you play at the African Cultural Trust, Heritage Trust, apologies.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Msizi Mshweti. I'm here on behalf of African Cultural Heritage Trust. I'm a member representing indigenous knowledge systems within the organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much. For the processes of being sworn in or being affirmed in, I'm going to ask you to stand up. Once again, sir, your full names for the record.
My name is Msizi Sexton Mshweti.
So you'll be taking the prescribed oath or affirmation.
I'll be taking the prescribed oath.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present before the commission is the truth, nothing but the whole truth? If so, raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
So you have 20 minutes, so you have until 10 past 11. Thank you.
Thank you again, Commissioner, and greetings to everyone. My name again is Msizi Mshweti. I'm here on behalf of the African Heritage Trust, Cultural Heritage Trust. It was my understanding that you'll have a copy of a presentation that I'm going to submit today, but I've been informed that you don't have a slide presentation of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read some paragraphs of it and then proceed to unpack more on the document. I'm not going to read the document paragraph by paragraph. I'll just read from the second paragraph. We wish to formally raise our grave concern regarding the widespread promotion, accessibility, and normalization of highly processed, chemically laden, and nutritionally depleted foods within South African food environment, particularly in low-income communities and school feeding programs. Across urban and rural areas alike, aggressively marketed ultra-processed foods high in refined sugars, industrial seed oils, synthetic additives, and preservatives have displaced traditional nutrient-dense food systems. Okay, thank you. Nutrient-dense food systems that sustain African communities for generations. These products are not merely unhealthy, they are structurally harmful. They contribute directly to the twin public health crises that now define our nation's nutritional landscape: chronic malnutrition and rising obesity. It is a tragic paradox that in one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, with rich agricultural indigenous knowledge systems, our people are simultaneously undernourished and overfed. The African Cultural Heritage Trust advocates for a decisive return to traditional and traditional-inspired food systems rooted in indigenous knowledge systems. These systems are not nostalgic artifacts of the past. They are scientifically sound, ecologically sustainable, and nutritionally superior. Crops such as sorghum, indigenous to Africa and historically central to our diets, are drought-resistant, mineral-rich, high in fiber and protein, and culturally embedded. Yet they remain marginalized in favor of important wheat-based and highly refined products. We further wish to highlight the untapped potential of hemp as a superfood crop within regulated frameworks. Hemp seed is exceptionally rich in complete incomplete plant protein, essential fatty acids, fiber, iron, and magnesium, properly incorporated into school feeding programs in the form of hemp porridge blends, fortified sorghum hemp meals, or protein supplements, it could significantly enhance nutritional outcomes for children, particularly in rural and historically disadvantaged communities. South Africa's food system must be reorientated towards food sovereignty, nutritional integrity, and cultural restoration. This includes supporting indigenous and climate-resilient crops such as sorghum, millet, amadumbe, and traditional legumes, reformulating school feeding programs to prioritize whole, minimally processed, nutrient-dense foods, regulating the aggressive marketing of ultra-processed foods to children, investing in community-based agri-ecological production rooted in indigenous knowledge systems, and recognizing that IK-based diets offer practical solutions to both malnutrition and obesity. The erosion of traditional diets is not merely a health issue, it is a cultural and human rights concern. Access to culturally appropriate, nutritious food is intrinsic to dignity, identity, and well-being. We respectfully submit that the Commission's investigation must critically interrogate the structural forces, including corporate concentration, industrial food lobbying, and policy capture that perpetuates dependence on processed foods at the expense of indigenous nutritious systems. So with your permission, Commissioners, I'm just going to go on to further unpack this document by reading from some of the presentation that I've prepared here. Before I begin, I'm just, as I continue, like I'm reminded of a story that happened in the country of Egypt about 4,000 years ago, where they were faced with the question of being in shortage of food, and they called on a very wise man by the name of Joseph, who foresaw 7 years of famine and 7 years of prosperity, and he was made the viceroy of the whole country of Egypt by the king, to be in charge of securing food for the whole nation. They came up with the system of storing foods in the pyramids for the first 7 years of wealth, so that like they could cater for the whole population in the next 7 years of famine. And they were so successful, like in that endeavor or initiative, that like many countries from all over Africa and the Middle East had to come to them for food. So I want to believe that food is one of the major contributors of a country becoming a superpower. I want to believe, Chairperson, that perhaps we have reached a stage as a country where we need to find ways to tap into our own natural resources to ensure that no one goes to bed hungry, and they have enough food for the next day and for the rest of their lives, so much that you can also export that food to other countries. We're a very rich country, Chairperson and Commissioners. We should not be going out to other countries begging for food or importing sick animals from other countries. For over centuries before the arrival of colonialism, we had crops like amadumbe, sorghum, ding, upatata, imifino, isgwamba, isjingi, isthwalapishi, izintanga, just to name a few. Unfortunately, I do not know some of these words in English, but just to name a few that are very resistant to drought, that are mineral rich and high in fiber and protein. But these indigenous foods have been replaced by wheat-based and highly refined products. This is because, commissioners, our country was not just colonized in terms of land and culture and everything, but we also colonized in terms of our taste buds. We have come to know things like food like amagwinya, ikota, isibindi, inhliziyo, inhloko, amathumbu as part of our culture. People even go to tourism areas as tourist attractions, like to places like Mai Mai and Nyansfield Hostel, to experience this kind of unhealthy diets. From an early age, our children in the townships, informal settlements, and rural areas are exposed to food colorants like amazimba, called scopas, and amakip-kip. This leads to people being exposed to all kinds of lifestyle diseases that leads to obesity, cancer, diabetes, etc. In some of the shops, they sell things like called glucose biscuits. I was very disturbed last week going through my WhatsApp when I read about a story about how children in schools are buying industrial oil to actually add flavor to the food that they are receiving at school. The African Cultural Heritage Trust is a cultural and spiritual movement. We recognize that food is part of our culture and forms part of the indigenous knowledge systems. Having started in 1984 as a cultural movement based mainly on dance and music, over the years we have moved into the space of food production. We're instrumental in lobbying and advocating for the legalization of cannabis as part of the indigenous foods. We are saying that Intsango is a tree. From the word umuti, when we talk about umuti, we're talking about a tree. And when you talk about imiti, we're talking about trees. Isihlahla or impande. In fact, the English word the cannabis does not do justice to the term Intsango in its proper isiZulu word. The word Intsango is taken from the word sangola, meaning to take things apart and put them together again as part of ukujula or uzila or meditation. Unfortunately, under Western thought, it was classified as a drug, but it is actually a holy herb. It is actually a holy herb that is used for religious ceremonies, and it was not smoked by anyone, but by wise old men and women who had reached a certain stage of spiritual development. It has been proven to be very instrumental in curing various diseases like that have to do with lungs. As a lifestyle herb, it can also be used to control weight. As a result, we have partnered with a variety of organizations like the African Farmers Association of South Africa, Ikwelo, and Druid's Garden to ensure that we produce food with enough, that is enough to feed our people. We need to partner with more bodies like the Human Rights Commission and other government institutions. Having worked with Amakosi and Izinduna in rural areas for over 30 years, we are advocating for the inclusion of people in informal settlements, townships, and rural areas to ensure that they have enough land to plant these products. We are currently trying to reintroduce old age concepts that were used in Africa, like the concept of litsima or ilima, whereby people actually plant together as communities to start food cooperatives and food gardens. We are currently advocating for the plantation of trees and in informal settlements and townships so that people can breathe proper air. We are advocating for such concepts as isipeko, whereby maybe like when you're having a traditional ceremony or any kind of ceremony, people will bring various products. One will bring amadumbe, one will bring itanga, one will bring tomatoes, potatoes, and whatever, and people eat as a community. We need to look at ways where we can form bakeries in townships, because those kind of businesses have been taken over by foreign nationals. We need to instill in our people again the importance and the discipline of planting food in their own food gardens. We need to understand that food does not come from ShopRite or Woolworths or Pick and Pay. The government can play a very central role in terms of that by actually supplying people with seeds. So as the African Cultural Heritage Trust, we would like to work a lot with bodies like the HRC in terms of empowering these communities and teaching proper diet in schools, because it starts from there. People need to know how to eat healthy again so that they do not have to become a burden to the system. People do not need, they don't need social grants, but more than anything, they need the land to plant their own food. And it is my firm belief, commissioners, that if we can work together in terms of implementing these systems in place, we can actually go a long way in terms of ensuring that we have 7 years of prosperity in our country again and into the future. I thank you for your time, commissioners. Siyathokoza.
So much. I'm going to hand over to the evidence leaders.
Thank you for the presentation, which really centered the indigenous food systems, in this whole debate. Because I know when I was engaging with other presenters,